A few years ago, I gave a sermon about the importance of understanding interpretation of Scripture, about how Torah is the greatest contribution to human culture because it truly is an Eitz Chaim, like we just read, like we just sang together. It is a tree of life, working on a variety of different levels that speak simultaneously to our heads and to our hearts. I need to take us down a slightly different path this morning. But before I do, we need to do what we call in the yeshivish world a little chazara. Some recapping, some going over what we've learned so that it's fresh in our mind. So if you'll bear with me quickly, here is al regel achat, on one foot, what we talked about on that Shabbat morning a few years ago. And I apologize, this is the weirdest thing that I've ever had to say, but for those in the sanctuary, if you can direct your attention to the television so you can see. This is a system called Pardaise, a word that translates to orchard, as in an apple orchard or a cherry orchard. But the word orchard, Pardaise, is also used interchangeably with the idea of heaven, the world beyond, transcendence. It is the source for the word paradise. Can you hear it? Pardaise, paradise. And when it comes to understanding text, it comes with the idea that analysis of Torah merits a place in the world to come. So put more succinctly, studying Torah allows us to reach the heavens. And that analysis, that study of Torah is called Pardaise. Because of the four modes of traditional study that make up the acronym, you guessed it, Pardaise. The top level, the most literal and fundamental reading of the text, is a methodology called pshat. The second level, the R or the resh, is known as hint, a little deeper. It's remez. The third level, a working allegory, parable, and metaphor, is drash. And finally, the innermost, this encapsulation of it all, is sod, the secret. Every page of Torah, every word of Torah, every word of the biblical text can be analyzed in all of these ways, each bringing a treasure of wisdom, insight, and importance to our lives, all of which give us a taste of Pardaise, of paradise. But this morning, I want to take this model, and I want to take it in a slightly different direction. Because as Jews, we know that our chiyuv, our obligation, is not just a spiritual or cognitive one. It's easy to bring out some visual aids so that we can understand how we're supposed to read text, but as Jews, we understand that our chiyuv, our obligation, is not just cognitive. It's not just supposed to be our head. We aren't asked to simply read Torah all day. We are asked to do Torah, to perform mitzvot. As the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, we are asked to take a leap of action, not a leap of faith. We know some of these mitzvot. We know some of these commandments. We know them intimately. We know them well. We know that we are to keep and to protect the 25 hours of Shabbat. We know that we are to give to the poor. We know that we're supposed to keep kosher, to honor our parents. There are many mitzvot that are just there, and we can talk about the nuances and truly try to understand them, but they're there. We know that they're there. We try our best to live our lives with them in mind. But there are other mitzvot. Remember, we have 613 mitzvot. Shabbat can be one, kashrut is one, 613. And some of them are a little bit more complicated. And they're complicated primarily because we don't see them in our everyday lives the same way that we do some of these other mitzvot. Mitzvot like agricultural laws. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but can anyone tell me the nuances of the mitzvah of payot, of leaving the four corners of our field open so that the poor can come and take from our fields without any embarrassment? Or the mitzvah of kilayim, of not mixing different crops in the same plot of soil. And I don't think we even need to get started on purity and impurity laws. They're more complicated. different parts of our lives that are really complicated. Those mitzvot, those commandments, feel in some ways foreign to us. And I want to acknowledge that. It's important to acknowledge that. They feel foreign. And so we respond to that obligation by diving deep, by moving away from pshat, that literal meaning, that fundamental meaning, and going deeper. That's where we feel most comfortable, in the remez, or the drash, or even the sod. Some way we can make the foreign feel a little bit more familiar to our modern lives. And that's okay. It's better than okay. It's good. It's beautiful. It's something that we need to be able to understand these things. But this morning, I'm going to do something that's going to challenge us a little bit. I'm going to challenge us to stay in the pshat, to try to avoid poetry and metaphor or any illusion, and to stubbornly remain on that surface level, because this morning there is a mitzvah in need of addressing in our community that requires our attention desperately. And it needs us to understand it without any kind of poetry or allegory. It needs us to understand it on the pshat level. Most of us probably never imagined that we would be confronted with the mitzvah of pidyon shvuyim, of freeing the captive. And like I said, if we've studied this mitzvah before, we've probably done so with some kind of spiritual or emotional acrobatics to make it make sense in our modern lives and our psychological approach to the world. But this morning, we are asked to perform this mitzvah without interpretation, without any commentary. On May 24th, Danny Fenster was boarding a plane in Myanmar to return home to Huntington Woods to be with his family. For the last 2 years, Danny has been working as a journalist in Myanmar, covering the nation's descent into stricter and stricter authoritarian rule. And at the airport in Yangon, Danny was arrested for his journalism. And now he has spent 3 weeks in a prison notorious for torture and inhumane conditions. He hasn't been allowed to speak to his family, to an attorney, nor to any U.S. consular staff. We have no idea of his condition or any information from the country of Myanmar at all. None. What we do have is a mitzvah, an obligation to do everything in our power to bring Danny home. And so this morning, these words aren't meant to be about our heads or even our hearts. They're meant to be words that are to inspire our hands, our feet, our actions, so that we can do just that. Here is where we start. In the days ahead, I urge each and every one of us to make this a priority in our lives. Tonight after Shabbat, you will receive an email or a message on social media that contains our next steps. Our mitzvah, our commandment, is to call our elected officials, not just once, but as often as necessary. Our mitzvah, our commandment, is to use the power of social media to bring this issue to the world so that it cannot be ignored. Change your profile picture, tag friends, family, and help spread the word that we are fighting, and we're fighting with vigor. And finally, part of our mitzvah is to be in contact with the Fenster family, to let them know that we are here for them in any and every way that we can be, to let them know that we are fighting at their side day in and day out, and to remind them and all of us that to be part of Am Yisrael, to be a member of this big, beautiful family of ours, is to care about one another with such love and dedication that it's impossible to tell where our nuclear family stops and our tribal family begins. That is our mitzvah. That is our obligation. This Shabbat, we come together to celebrate what it means to be Am Yisrael, what it means to be Jewish. We come here to celebrate with Ryan and his family, to honor and fall into the peace and love of this palace and time that we call Shabbat. And we celebrate that what it means to be Jewish is sometimes to forget some of those aspects of paradise so that we can focus on the here and the now and reaffirm our commitment to Torah in its most surface level and unambiguous form. Today we shamor Shabbat. We guard Shabbat. We zachor Shabbat. We remember and we honor Shabbat. But today we also take on the mitzvah of pidyon shibuyim, of freeing the captives. Not with poetry, not with allegory, but with our hands and with our feet. We won't stop until you're home, Danny. That is our peshat, and that is our promise.